Hello and welcome once again to the Progressions of Consciousness Internet Radio broadcast. I'm Keith David Henry and you're listening to CLN, the Community Listening Network. This is going to be the third show in the series of the Fallacy of Separation. The ideal that we are separate beings that have no connectivity with each other except a common heritage of humanity is a fallacy. The truth is that we are connected if you believe the theories of modern science, that we're connected on an atomic level. The very particles of which we are made are in constant communication with each other, are communicating with each other and with every other particle in the universe. Somehow, as sentient beings, we've been reduced to the estate of lonely, separate people roaming the world trying to make our way in a system that often doesn't make a lot of sense, as victims rather than creators of the utopia that we have the potential to create. Well, not to worry, because we are quickly approaching the Aquarian age and we're approaching a new paradigm of existence upon the planet. And if I didn't get into detail about the Aquarian age, let me just explain a bit about it. The Mayan calendar has several elements to it, as we discussed before, and I'm not going to go into the details of it because there's so much material out there that if you want to get a handle on the Mayan calendar and what it means in terms of the Aquarian age, the information is out there. But let me just hasten to add, you're not going to read a lot of material about the Mayan calendar that mentions the Aquarian age. The Aquarian age is a period of approximately 26,000 years that has to do with the orientation of the Earth with relation to the constellation of Aquarius. And what many people don't understand is that these astrological events and that this information, this energy that is coming from these relationships between humans and the Earth and astrological constellations is like a huge galactic broadcasting station that is broadcasting information to us about who we are and what our destiny is as a species and as a universe. It's no surprise, here I go again, you know it's coming, it's no surprise that religion prohibits and treats as taboo these sciences of astrology that have been understood and used by cultures that are tens of thousands of years old. So the question that begs to be answered is, why does religion taboo these things? Well, they're of the devil, right? Well, maybe they're not of the devil. Maybe there's some information there that it's not in the best interests of the people that are treating this as taboo to make us aware of. And I'm not talking about, you know, various people within the system. I'm talking about the system itself. I mean, this thing was wound up a long time ago, and the people that are largely practitioners in the system are not the ones to blame for this type of outlook on esoteric, this kind of prohibition of exploring these things that are literally sciences. I mean, it's not spooky spiritual stuff, it is science. I had a conversation recently with a Catholic priest. I consider him a very good friend of mine, and I think he considers me a friend of his as well. And we often talk about esoteric things. And he was telling me, he was saying, well, you know, all of these theories and things that these scientists come up with, they're nothing but theories. I mean, why do people put so much emphasis on theories? He's an extremely intelligent man. He's got 2 degrees, and he's a very conscientious man. And he says, you know, you can't really you can't mix a conversation of science and theory with religion, because religion isn't based on science and theory. And I was very quick to agree with him. Yet it was, you know, I couldn't ignore the contradiction that here you have a man who is questioning how people can come up with conclusions based on, you know, what I understand to be ancient science, and to put so much stock in them. I couldn't understand how here's a man who has dedicated his whole life essentially to a book or to a teaching that doesn't need to be proven. That there's proof is not an issue, because it's a matter of faith. Yet he seemed to be criticizing the idea of taking the scientific discoveries, the recent scientific discoveries, and taking information that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, that is celebrated and accepted by many, many ancient cultures as science. It's very important that you realize that this is science. I mean, on one of the former programs, I made a statement that maybe people didn't understand, and I said, you know, I'm not necessarily one of those that believes that, you know, you get your horoscope every day and it tells you what's going to happen. Well, what I meant by that primarily was that we are the ones that determine what happens in our lives, not the stars, because that's another trap that you can get stuck in, where you're dependent upon someone or something to tell you what you should do, where you should go, or how you should act. But I will say that I am fully aware of the influences that the cosmos have on us as a species, and particularly the esoteric energetic effects that the heavenly bodies have. And as I mentioned in a previous program, the book of Genesis talks about the heavens and the stars being for signs and seasons for us, and it doesn't go into detail about it, but many other esoteric books do. And what we need to understand is that these seasons of time are literally reflectors of energy that is affecting the human species. Now, one of the primary, I would say, influences that the Aquarian age brings in is the age of the individual, the age of individual growth and responsibility and creativity. The ideals of hierarchy, where you have somebody telling you what to do, and you're responsible to that hierarchy, those days are coming to a close. But you have to realize these events that we're talking about are based on the positions of constellations that are, you know, light years away. And for you to get an idea of what a light year is, I'm sure many of you already know, but, you know, space is so large that we no longer measure distance in miles or hundreds of miles or even millions of miles. It's much more convenient to measure it in light years. Now, light travels at, I believe it's 386,000 miles per second or something like that. Well, a light year is the amount of time it takes for light to travel 1 year, or the distance in which light would travel in 1 year, which is a huge, huge distance. I mean, you know, how many seconds are in a year? So we measure space by light years. So some of these constellations are light years away. So when you start talking about, well, the Aquarian age is going to start in 2012 or 2040 or 2050, it's not like opening and closing a door. It's a shift of energy that takes many, many years. So we're actually right now in the transition from the Pisces age into the Aquarian age. So you're going to find that both energies are still prevalent. The energy of the hierarchy, of the ruling class, if you will, and the energy of individual autonomy. Both of those energies are prevalent, but the newer energy is really the one that we need to begin to explore. So we're right at the beginning of that 26,000 year cycle of individual autonomy, individual exploration, individual growth. And when I say growth, I don't mean that we have to become something, that we have to become perfect. What I mean is we begin to expand. We begin to take on the role of creativity that we are here to take on as an individual and as a species. And when you start talking in terms of hierarchy and the way things have been, the way we tend to look at it is, well, you get a bunch of people together and you get a leader, and then, you know, if it's a good leader, then the leader is as open to listening as they are to you know, making edicts and giving commands. And, you know, that leader, if they're a good leader also, they're interested in the success of the group and not just, you know, someone doing what they tell them to do. But this whole model of the group dynamic coming together and creating something is something we're leaving behind. We're leaving this behind. We're moving into a place where we as individuals are going to become creative, and the group dynamic is strictly a result of our connectedness. It's not that we have to sit down and have a meeting, although there's certainly a lot of value in that. I mean, we're not in the middle of the Aquarian age. We're still in the Pisces age. And no matter what age we're in, there's never anything wrong with a group sitting down and discussing things. But we're moving into an area where the idea of having to be in a certain place to communicate with others is going to become foreign. And that the discovery and the growth and the creativity is going to be an individual phenomenon that will automatically be assimilated by the group. You know, and you get these pictures of Star Trek, you know, what are you talking about, the Borg, where resistance is futile? Well, what we're talking about is a connectedness where the concept of resistance is going to be as foreign to us as the concept of not having, you know, basic technology, for instance, would be foreign to the people that came before us. In other words, you know, if you believe the whole idea of the caveman and whatnot, you know, they had fire and they had to go out and hunt, and I don't know how much of that is true. I'm not an anthropologist. I haven't really studied it. But, you know, we have certain things that we're used to, and I think about the kids these days that don't realize that at one point there was not an internet. So to them, what do you mean there was no internet? They don't have any concept that there was not an internet at some point. So we're moving into an age where the ideal that there's some other form of communication besides our you know, universal connectedness to each other is going to be foreign. So it's no longer a matter of trying to get people together in groups to accomplish something. That dynamic is going to be unnecessary because it's going to be replaced with a greater dynamic of realization and understanding of our connectedness. so that the real thrust is going to be individual experimentation, individual questioning, individual exploration. That's where we are now, and it will behoove you to start realizing that everything you need to accomplish that kind of connectedness is already in place. It's not something that has to happen. It's not something that the Aquarian Age brought with it. It's something that the Aquarian Age is bringing to light. The energy of the Aquarian Age is bringing this to light. We're in a period of revelation, of enlightenment. Now, in the last program, we started getting a bit into the progressions of consciousness states model. And if you're following along with us, I'm going to direct you again to my website, www.don'treadthisbook.net. And you'll find on that website in the left column under book information a link that says View Progressions of Consciousness Chart. And this is the chart we started working with last week from the beginning of it. And just to rehash very quickly, the slumbering state is characterized by sort of a murky, cloudy, inaccurate view of who we are and how we relate to each other, to the universe, and to God. And some of us have more of a feel for what's going on than others, but especially if we're awake. But for the slumbering soul, the slumber state, really either has a hard and fast, and I might add stubborn view of who they are based on pretty much a book, which, if you look at that from a strictly objective standpoint, it's a little bit silly, really. And I know I'm stepping on some toes right now, but think about what's going on. Here you've got this book, and this is truth from God, and you're one of only thousands of other societies and religions and groups that believe the same thing. Yet you never stop to say, well, what if I'm wrong and they're right? You know, which is really a very interesting psychological posture to take, that, you know, somehow I'm select, I'm special, and they're all wrong and I'm right. But everyone has, so is either some kind of dogmatic stance or sort of a I don't know. And now for you religionists out there, maybe I'll make you a little happier, because now I'm going to pick on the atheists. Because atheism is really nothing more than a religion. Because atheism says, well, there is no God. And my only question is, how in the world do you know that? How do you know that? Or maybe they're saying, well, there's no God according to, you know, the Bible, or, you know, what religious people say. Well, I mean, that's a foregone conclusion. But how can you make a statement that there's no God? Because in order to be accurate with that statement, the first and most important thing is that, you know, God would have to want to be found by you. You know what I mean? I mean, you're pretty important that you believe that, you know, God is just out there waiting for you to hopefully acknowledge Him and look in the right places for Him, or it, or her, or whatever you want to say. So the atheist that says there is no God has faith that there is no God. But in all actuality, my belief about atheism is that atheism is an emotional response to disappointment for things that have happened that, you know, have had no valid explanation, or that have not met the models of, you know, theological thought that they had subscribed to, and so now they're mad at God because, you know, how could he let this happen, or how could he do this, or how could he allow that? So in many ways, I believe the atheist has more faith than many religionists, because the atheist is essentially, you know, balling up his fist and waving it in quote unquote God's face, saying, "You may be mad, now I'm not going to believe in you." So I believe that, you know, for the most part, atheists have more faith than Christians in some respects, or other religionists. But getting back to the slumber state diagram in our chart, we've been talking about separation and war, and how the hallmark of the slumber state is some kind of war, and that condition, that general condition of warlike behavior and warlike outlook, is not something that naturally developed. It's something that has been programmed and conditioned into us for the sake of keeping us from really thinking about each other as brothers and sisters, and really coming together in productive ways. And that this war-like mentality, whether you're talking about military warfare or whether you're talking about a war of idealism, is designed to keep us separate. Now, in my diagram, again, www.don'treadthisbook.net/chart, you can get to it that way also. I have this elliptical drawing of that represents the experience of the person in the slumber state. And on the right of that diagram, I have something in quotes called physical reality. Well, we already spent quite a bit of time on that, where I explained from the standpoint of physics that physical reality is neither physical nor real, based on our definitions of it, but that physical reality seems to be a field of consciousness that seems to manifest as material when it is observed. Science calls it a field of probability. It can also be referred to the fifth dimension, the place of, if you subscribe to Einstein and some of his contemporaries, the place of true origin of our existence as a human being. Whatever that definition of human means to you, I believe that the actual definition should be extended to include a being whose true essence exists in the fifth dimension. Now, if you want to talk about your true nature as a galactic being, as a spirit being, well, your essence exists in all places, because we are connected to everything, and everything is a part of us. But I'm talking about just our definition of humans, of humanity, what it means to be human, and what is being revealed now to us, what is coming to light on an individual basis. You don't necessarily have people crowding into seminars and learning this. What's happening is people are coming to this conclusion on their own, through their connectedness to Source, that we are creative beings, if you want to say fifth dimensional beings, that are not just these bodies walking around in these brains and these physical senses and this perception and this ego that lives for 100 years and then dies. But for the slumbering person, that's pretty much their lot. That's what they see. And the best they can do is leave some legacy, maybe create something great, or have children that will, you know, carry on the family name, or something where when they are gone, they suppose, they leave a bit of themselves here. Well, you're never gone, you never leave. We're all one. There is no separate reality of being here or there, or alive or dead. That's pretty much perception. So this realm of physical reality, however, is what the slumbering person considers reality. And I gave this if you want to call it this paradigm of existence, the name of the time-space continuum. And the time-space continuum basically says that there's stuff called matter that moves around in space creating time. Because if you want to get into a definition of what time is, well, time is nothing more than a measurement of matter, the measurement of the motion of matter from one place to another. I mentioned in one of my books, I believe the book is The Invisible World and Other Obvious Things. I mentioned in that book that I had a different take on the verse in the book of Genesis that says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And whether you're a Christian or whether you're strictly coming from a scientific standpoint with the Big Bang or some combination thereof, one of the questions that's always asked is, well, what was there before the Big Bang, or what was there before creation? And it always tickles me when Christians say, well, you have the Big Bang, but where did the Big Bang come from? Okay, well, you have creation, but what was there before creation? Where did that come from? Where did God come from? Well, he always was. Well, that's a convenient answer, and it certainly can't be argued with, because it's not a matter of science, it's a matter of faith. But when you start talking about where did space and time come from, that's really a pretty easy question to answer. And when you say, well, yeah, you believe in the Big Bang, but who created the Big Bang, or where did the Big Bang come from? What was its origin? What you need to think about is that whatever was in existence before the Big Bang was not subject to time. And you can't even discuss the concept of origin without discussing the concept of time. So really, as I said, time is a measurement of the movement of matter over distance. So the verse that says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, even from a Christian standpoint, is probably more accurately translated, God created the heavens and the earth, then time began. Now, the New International Version translates that verse, in the beginning God created time, or something very similar to that. Because if you look at the wording and what's actually being said and compare it with scientific findings and discoveries about time, it's much more accurate to think of creation in terms of time than in terms of material. And what Einstein did was he said, well, you can't separate time from material. You can't separate time from space, so you really need to call it time-space. So it's the time-space continuum. Time and space are inseparable, because you don't have time without space, and you don't have space without time. In other words, space is defined as, if you could put it this way, as a certain distance or a certain existence of things that take time to get to. I know I violated my own rule, because you can't use a word to define a word, but there's really no way to think of it, and that's why they're both one thing, time-space. So the time-space continuum consists of matter, if you will, that we measure because it used to be here and now it's there, so now we have a context of time to think about it. But what Einstein showed is that all that is relative anyway, because we tend to think of time as such a fixed thing when it's really not. And there's actually both scientific and just empirical proof that time is relative. For instance, Einstein said, time is faster or slower, moves faster or slower depending on how quickly you're moving. And this is proven. If any of you use a GPS device, you know that because of the speed that the satellites are moving, that the time has to be adjusted ever so slightly, ever so often, so you don't become inaccurate. because the satellites are moving so quickly that time actually moves differently. It progresses differently for the satellite than it does for the people on the planet. And we've had instances with space shots where the clocks on the rockets were out of sync when they returned because of the speed with which the rockets were moving. So something as critical as time to us, you got to be to work at a certain time. It takes a certain time to bake a cake. It takes a certain amount of time before you can get your license. It takes, time is such an important thing. But even in that, it tickles me that you can have a president say, okay, well, at 1 o'clock in the morning, we're going to just turn the clock back. And now it's going to be a different time. And everyone says, okay, now it's a different time. So time is by no means anything, solid. And it speaks to the nature of the entire space-time continuum. There are things within this physical reality that we assume is physical that really have nothing to do with anything solid and substantial and hard and fast. But in the slumber state, it appears to be so. It appears that everything is fixed, including ourselves, that we are these solitary beings, that if we're lucky, we'll get in a relationship with someone that's happy, or we'll have family, or we'll find some kind of pursuit that makes us happy. But we're still victims of largely of a paradigm of separation and isolation. So in this slumber state, we tend to think in linear thought. In other words, there's a start to something and there's an end to something. The disadvantage of this particular way of thought is that it tends to keep us locked into that whole the whole process or mechanism of the body senses and what they take in, the mind and the ego and the perception, and making sense of what the world is all about based on these limited facilities. Now, when I say limited, I don't mean to say that there's anything inherently wrong or that has inherent limitations about this arrangement. The problem is that we don't go any further than these facilities. I think the common thought when you start talking about spirituality or transcendence is that we give up these facilities, that we forego the body senses, that we treat them as unimportant, and that we treat the mind as unimportant, that we treat the ego as unimportant, or things that need to somehow be changed or fixed. And I will say that, if there's anything that needs to be fixed, it's the ego. Because the ego, over the years, has been bruised. Over the thousands and thousands of years of history, has been bruised by the things that have happened to us as a race. So, absolutely, it needs to be fixed. But it doesn't need, the nature of the ego doesn't need to be changed. What the ego does not need to be changed. Because the ego gives you a feeling of individuality. And we're not to throw that out. That's not going to help anybody trying to throw that out. And as I said in a previous program, if you think you're going to be successful throwing the ego out, well, you're in for quite a struggle, because the ego is not one to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to shut up and pay attention. That's not what it's designed to do. So if you think you're going to shut the ego out, shut the ego down, or turn the ego off, you're in for a rude awakening. So what do these facilities then provide for us? They provide for us a means of identifying with the time-space continuum or physical reality in a way that it seems real. I can't put it any differently than that. It's supposed to seem real, but it's not supposed to seem more real than the actual reality of our connectedness to everything and the reality of our infinite potential. It's a playground. It's a place of physical creation, if you will. It's supposed to be a joyful existence, a joyful, playful existence. But it has become something much different than that because of the dark oligarchy. Now, I've spoken a lot about the dark oligarchy, and I haven't said who they are. One of the reasons I haven't said is because I honestly don't know who they are. I have a few theories about who I think they are based on, personal research and based on the research of others. Before I get into that, let me back up a bit. And many of my listeners are familiar with a gentleman by the name of Michael Tellinger, who has been doing, a lot of research into the origins of mankind. And, one of the articles that he put out, I'm a subscriber to his newsletter. Also, if you're not a subscriber, I highly recommend that you visit his website, www.slavespecies.com, and become a member of that distribution list. And if you somehow have some kind of aversion to that, then you can visit my site, because I archive all of his newsletters on my website. And you can get to that link by visiting www.don'treadthisbook.net. Near the right side of the page, on the recommended reading section, you'll see a link to the Michael Tellinger newsletter archives. But one of the articles he sent out talks about how scientists are believing that the origins of life on the planet may have been from stuff, if you will, that came from outer space and seeded the planet, and that, many races came from those seeds, which would also explain why, when people think about extraterrestrials, why they would seem humanoid. Because one of the objections that you've heard people say is, well, why do people think that E.T., is humanoid, has 2 arms and 2 legs and 2 eyes and a nose and whatnot. And, the ideal that life may have originated in outer space, by the way, which is not new, is not something that Michael Tellinger came up with, but it is the most recent the most recent ideals about that are something that I'm very happy to have been associated to here. But for years, people, astrophysics has said, these asteroids that are flying around, these chunks of life, they seem to be teeming with life. And now the scientists are saying it almost seems like even outer space, cold, what was previously thought of as dead outer space, is literally teeming with life. And that life is extremely hardy and extremely difficult to stamp out. And that there's life everywhere in the universe, even in outer space. Not necessarily on planets, but just in the gases that compose outer space, that there are actually organisms that are living or that are looking for some place to seed themselves. And if we're not talking necessarily about actual living organisms, we're talking about the components that create the biological and chemical components that create life, that are the building blocks of life, is just everywhere. So that isn't to say that if there were intelligent human life out there, or I'm sorry, intelligent extraterrestrial life, that some of it wouldn't appear to be humanoid necessarily. I mean, that's hardly worth arguing about. But it is extremely logical to presume that humanoid life would look like extraterrestrial life if we somehow all came from the same common stuff, the same building blocks that seems to exist everywhere in the universe. So when we start talking about the dark oligarchy, many people have said and have postulated that the dark oligarchy is a group of intelligent extraterrestrials. who have come to the planet and who have been here for a very, very, very long time, and have created these systems with which they can control and enslave mankind. And, you know, a lot of this may sound like way out there science fiction, but think about how it would sound to someone who had never heard, you know, the story of the creation of the universe, how ridiculous that might sound to them from a standpoint of religion. So how it sounds has nothing to do with how viable a theory it may be, or how real or how true it might be. So you can stamp that one out. But that this dark oligarchy has been controlling mankind. Now, here's some information that was shared with me by Mother Earth, and I hope you're sitting down, because this is going to, if what I just said sounded weird, then what I'm about to say is probably going to sound much weirder. I've had communications with two beings. One of them is Uriel, the Archangel, and the other is Mother Earth herself. Now, what I didn't realize is how connected these two beings are. I mean, it's like they're best buddies, and that they're you know, what we would say tied at the hip, so to speak, joined at the hip. But Uriel shared some very interesting information with me about mankind many, many years ago. I mean, we're talking about 15 years ago. And, you know, I'm hearing all of these things that are, you know, by and large considered new ways of thinking about us as a species. And these are things that I heard 15 years ago, but didn't really share with too many people, because I'm thinking, well, everybody's going to think I'm crazy. The point is now is I don't care if everyone thinks I'm crazy, so I feel free to express it. But Mother Earth has shared some very interesting things with me about our connectedness with her. And this, I believe, is going to be very, very key. And I think that everyone should put on their ears and listen carefully to the information that I'm about to share with you. Mother Earth has explained to me in no uncertain terms that the connection between her and us as humans is so strong and so available and so powerful that we need to begin to take advantage of that connectedness. So, you know, one of the things I've said constantly is that we are all connected to each other and to everything in the universe. But our connection to Mother Earth is analogous to a child's connection to their mother. So while, you know, no one that is of the persuasion of esoteric thought, especially of the energy that's coming into the world right now, would think it's strange at all to say that, hey, we're connected to everything. Some might say, well, what's the difference between our connectedness to everything and our connectedness to Mother Earth? And that's why I use the analogy of the mother and the child connection, because it's a natural connection that you don't have to be a guru to connect with. You don't have to be particularly informed about who you are as a spirit being. You don't have to have any kind of special apparatus or knowledge of metaphysics to do this. All you have to do is have the desire to do it. And the way she put it to me is that every mother knows what their child needs. I mean, for instance, you have a baby, a newborn baby or a toddler, and the toddler doesn't have to articulate to mother that it's hungry or that it needs its diaper change. It just, you know, cries, wah, you know. So if all you can muster is a wah to Mother Earth, that's enough. Well, what kind of help is Mother Earth going to provide for us? That's where it gets even more interesting. Because much like with a parent-child relationship, just like every kid is different to some degree and has different needs, we are all unique and different and have different needs. And that connectedness that we have with Mother Earth can be exploited on an individual basis, and in fact is best explored on an individual basis. I mean, I could give you certain things you could do and certain rituals you could perform and certain ways you could look at things or certain places you could go where you could literally feel that connectedness to nature, or you could feel it more in one place than another. But what's beautiful about this arrangement, and what Mother Earth seems to be just stressing so powerfully and so specific to me, is that we need to investigate that connectedness to her on an individual basis so that her help can be applied to us in the most appropriate and resonant way, so that we get the most benefit out of that connectedness as individuals, not as a group. That's what's so important. But now I'm going to take it even a step further, because what Mother Earth has said to me, and I call her Terra, what Terra has said to me is that we as human beings have been severely damaged from an emotional standpoint, from a subconscious standpoint, and all of this speaks to who we see ourselves as ego. So that emotionally, and this is one of the things that I picked up really listening to Michael Tsarian's talks about the origins of man, that emotionally, as a race, we're children. We're really immature emotionally as a race. And, you know, one of the ways that manifests, or what that really means, is that we don't know how to deal with our emotions. We haven't been taught to deal with our emotions, but even more so, our emotional immaturity has been exploited. And we've been traumatized because of that. And you know, there were some events that weren't necessarily targeted at our emotion and our subconscious, but they affected us as such. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about what Michael Tsarian was talking about was how the various traumatic events that have happened in the ancient past of human beings have damaged us to the point where we haven't had the time to consciously assimilate it. For instance, you know, one of the things he talked about was, you know, there's a period of time in, you know, relatively recent human history, and I'm talking, you know, tens or hundreds of thousands of years, where we only lived to a certain age. We only lived to 30 or 40 or 50 years old, and sometimes much younger than that. So there's no time to develop, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Reincarnation cycle, where we could pass that the information of how to cope with this this emotional stress and this subconscious stress, where we could pass that information to the next, you know, to our children through the genes or through other esoteric means of communications. So we haven't had the development that we need to be able to deal with these emotional and subconscious deficiencies. And I really appreciate where Michael Tsarian is going with it, because one of the things that he says straight out is we need to face it and start looking at it and respond to it and deal with it. We need to start moving in an area where we can heal those damaged facilities that have got us groping around pretty much in the darkness as slumbering beings, trying to make sense out of it all. And what Mother Earth has shared with me, and this is really where I want you to if you would please, to really start paying attention. What Terra has shared with me is the tremendous amount of personal work that is necessary for us as individuals on our own, or using various types of therapy or various types of spiritual practices or various ancient techniques, can be cut in literally 1/100th of the amount of time and effort simply by connecting with her. One of the things I liked about what Michael Tessarian was talking about was, a lot of these religions, a lot of these esoteric and ancient practices, people misunderstood what they were for. They weren't to make us spiritual. They were to repair the damage that had occurred to our psyche, to our ego, to our subconscious, because of all the years of abuse and all the years of trauma. Well, what Tara is telling me is that we can connect with her on the slightest basis. And the analogy I used was a baby crying, where you may not even know what you need, you just know that you have a need and you can't articulate it. That a great deal of that healing, a great deal of that repair to our subconscious and emotions can be dealt with very, very quickly, very effectively, simply by consciously connecting with Tara as our mother, as a sentient, conscious being who knows what we need and knows how to deal with that need. So you're literally talking about, the efforts of many, many, many people, not just on the planet, but many. If any of you were listening to the program, Joanna had the Galactic Council on, and you've got all of this information that's coming forth to help us, to direct us where we should go, and yet we're ignoring one that is right here with us and has been with us. She's been intimately associated with us and connected with us from a physical standpoint, from a spirit standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, through all of this. And she's gone through a lot of the same trauma herself. As a matter of fact, one of the things she explained to me is that Uriel has helped her in this healing process. So that she is in a unique position to help us through this very specific area of emotional, subconscious, and ego healing. And as I say, please don't make a religion out of this. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. It's very, very simple. It's simply reaching out to Mother Earth. Mom, I need help. Help me. And that help is going to manifest to you differently than it will manifest to others. As a matter of fact, what she's saying to me is that, her help could manifest in 7 billion different ways, because there's 7 billion different people. But the thing I really want to get to is the speed with which she says this healing can occur by connecting with her. And the terminology she used is that a great deal of this healing can occur over a period of weeks and months rather than years. So we'd really be remiss to not take advantage of what she is offering us. And if you're expecting me to give you a means of approaching this, I have several things in mind, but I really don't feel compelled to discuss them with you, because these are ways that I connect with her. I mean, there are easy ways, no-brainer ways, getting in areas where there's nature and not so much technology or buildings, or getting in buildings that were designed to channel and concentrate energy, like a lot of old cathedrals and churches. Or one of the things that Joanne talked about was bringing elements of nature into your home. Now, one of the ways I've accomplished that is I'm a big advocate of crystals and gemstones. Because, I mean, I hope this doesn't sound too gross, but these are mom's guts in my living room. These are parts of the inner workings of the earth herself. These are facilities or minerals or whatever you want to call them that are designed to facilitate mother's health, facilitate Tara's health and growth, and it's sitting here on my living room table. I think that's amazing. I think that's a beautiful way to do it, and again, as an example of a no-brainer approach. But what Tara shared with me is that your intuitive approach is going to be 1,000 times more effective than some ancient method. Your intuitive approach based on your connectedness with your own individuality and your connectedness to Source and your openness to Tara as a sentient being who is just waiting for the invitation to help is going to be so incredibly effective. And what she said to me is that we as a race, you know, if all 7 billion people on the planet all at once looked at Mom and said help, from that moment on, from that moment into the next age, we could experience a utopian-like society regardless of everything that is going on. And this is something that I've tried to picture happening in my head. I can't picture that. Nevertheless, Tara assures me that that could happen. Now, what she also explained to me is that you're only going to have a certain subset of people that are going to take this invitation seriously and move on it. But even so, the people who do will have an extremely powerful and exponential effect on the rest of humanity because we're all connected. So, do you see? I find it extremely interesting of one of the time frames that Joanna mentioned that was channeled through Johanna through the council, and they were talking about 22 months. Well, I remember years ago when I first started becoming aware of the Mayan prophecy of 2012, what I was told was that things are going to be wrapped up by 2011. And that whatever people thought might happen in 2012 was not even going to be an issue. So I was very pleasantly surprised by the timeline that Joanna laid out. Okay, so I'm out of time here. Please join us next week. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. This is Keith David Henry. I'll see you next week.